to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Joe Atwill. First, just a couple of announcements. Check out our new show. It happened May the 4th. It's available on YouTube and all podcast platforms. We have links right in the description. Also, check out the Forbidden documentary, Occult Louisiana, available on Tubi and multiple streaming platforms. If you would like to help with our upcoming film project, we're having a fundraiser. There's links in the description, or you can visit supportfkn.com. If you'd like to help in any other way, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Also, be sure to get a Rokfin premium membership. Go to rokfin.com/FKN Plus and get access to all our premium content. And if you listen to the podcast through audio podcast platforms, listen through Spreaker, download our episodes there. That's always free for you. Finally, booking guests for July. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome back to the show Joe Atwill. He is an author and researcher that began his religious studies as a youth in Japan at Mary's Military Academy. After selling his shares in the software industry, he engaged into biblical studies and his research into several historical topics. Joe, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm just fine. How are you doing?
Excellent. It is great to have you back on. Looking forward to this talk. Last time you were on, we discussed a bit about the history of the ruling class control systems. And today, I'd love to get your insights into what's unfolded into our modern control system, some of the groups behind it, how we seem to be witnessing attempts at forced prophecy and apocalyptic program, attempts to try and manifest chaos and new forms of control. But before we get into any of this, remind the audience just a little bit about yourself and your work.
Well, I'm certainly best known for work I did on the origins of Christianity. I wrote a book called Caesar's Messiah that was made into a documentary. Both the book and the documentary have been surprisingly big sellers, and I also wrote a book on Shakespeare called Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, which it shows the relationship between the kind of typology that I indicate in the Gospels have to do with Roman provenance of Rome creating religion. And this was sort of a hidden understanding that certain groups had of Christianity. The material that I brought out in Caesar's Messiah, I wasn't the first person to see this. Other groups had understood it, and so the group that produced Shakespeare had understood it. And so that led to analysis I did in The Tempest. Now, the two books, you have to pay for, but The Tempest analysis is available for anyone. You just Google my name in The Tempest, and you can see that play is cryptic and has a kind of a meaning people haven't understood to date, which is that it's really about a kind of reaction against Roman Christianity by a group of kind of occulted Jews. And so when you understand the sort of typologic meaning of The Tempest, you can see it's actually describing, a kind of military response to sort of the Christian culture, and that the Jews are hidden. They are, in that era, they were called Marranos or Conversos. So they didn't really reveal their identity, though they kept their Jewishness part of their mind and soul, and they just presented themselves as Christians, which of course they had to do legally. For example, in Britain, you had to be, you couldn't be Jewish in this area. They had been expelled. You had to be Christian, and so when you read that analysis, which is important in relationship to the modern world, because in the play you get the expression "Brave New World." It comes from a statement in the Tempest. And when you put it in the context of my analysis, you can see that Huxley and Kipling, the people who then use the expression later on, were talking about a kind of slave state that could be established, in which Christianity and Christians would be reduced to very low levels. In Huxley's case, you have the classes of intelligence, alpha through epsilon, and the state would control the production of children. They would control the education, and this would be the Brave New World. Well, when you look at the analysis of I do of the Tempest, which shows that the play The Tempest is actually a manifestation of Isaiah's prophecy in the Old Testament. And in the book of Isaiah, you have all of the events in the Tempest or the events in the Tempest are drawn from Isaiah. And I show that heretofore scholars really haven't seen the complete all of the connections. And if you actually do understand them, you can see that it's leading to a kind of bad place for the Gentiles. So this then was sort of a kind of a platform from which it's sort of odd coming out of the studies of the New Testament and then the Shakespearean literature that you would get into modern conspiracy theory. I mean, how does this actually connect? But seeing how they were looking at the prophecies of Isaiah, I certainly was suspicious of this. And then when 9/11 occurred, 2001, I could easily understand it because of my background, which unfortunately wasn't really held by many people. But I knew that the date had been chosen deliberately. Now, this was critical, that 9/11 is the date of that Jews celebrate, or so they mourn the destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed twice. There was two temples. They were both destroyed, and the date of this destruction was 9/11. It's a typologic representation. It would be written 9/11 in Hebrew, though it wouldn't be September 11th, but they are representing it, the date typologically. And then remember that in 2001, one of the buildings that was destroyed was the Solomon building, which of course sort of, they were tipping their hat to the building of Solomon and the destruction of that. But they chose the date because it would be the first year of the third millennium. So you have 2001, and now instead of it's reversing the typology, and now it's the sort of Gentiles, economic temple that's being destroyed, and the brave new world is being established, and so that's why 9/11 was chosen as the date for it, and September the 1st. And that's why there was so much foreshadowing of it. This was easy to understand for people inside the secret society that manipulates these things. They would understand the date. And so you see dozens of representation of 9/11 leading up to the event, right, in Hollywood movies and whatnot. And that's just because people would understand that would be the first date of the new millennium from which they could start the brave new world. And this, I found troubling, of course, as to, well, who are these people? And I wanted to point out, I'm not, accusing Jews in a general sense here. I'm saying that as you would have with the mafia, having its origins, and with Sicilians, it isn't the Sicilian people that are producing it. It's a group that share this ethnicity, that use the ethnicity as part of their way of maintaining secrecy.
Almost hiding behind it in a way, right?
Exactly. And so they can keep the people inside their immediate circle as a trusting close level because they share the ethnicity, but they don't take this information to their general ethnicity. I mean, if the Sicilian people knew who were the members of the mafia were, and they would probably strike against them. And I think the same is true here. I call the group, you're talking about who are the people that do this. I call them like Judeo-Masonic, because you have so many secret societies, and the Masons being the prime example, that are involved with this. So if you look at, take 911, you have so many people who are of Jewish background involved in the whole overall structure. You have Larry Silverman and dancing Israelis, all these people, all these connections into the event. But then you also have the Bush family, who are purportedly, Christian. At least they maintain this, but they're also part of Skull and Bones for generations. And Skull and Bones is a secret society, and obviously it's an annex of Freemasonry. If you look at the symbolism, it's obviously has some relation to Freemasonry. So who are and what are Christians who maintain allegiance to a secret society? I mean, I would just say, look, these people are Christians with an asterisk, because you don't really know what they are, at a deep level, because they're in a secret society, which is secret. Therefore, you don't get to understand the oaths they take or what the goals are. And you don't know whether or not they're using their Christian identity just as a cover for other kinds of activities. I mean, if you just take any kind of CIA agent, for example, and you say, well, what do you do? The person doesn't say, I'm a CIA secret agent. They have some cover story. It's just, obvious. And so the same thing would be the case here, where being a Christian is useful, right, as a cover, but you can't really be sure that they are. In the Middle Ages, the issue, the problem with converso was probably the biggest problem that Europe faced, in that they saw that there were, or at least they maintained that there were a lot of conversos, people who had been Jewish, who had converted to Christianity, that were still operating in the Jewish context and were sort of, in a way, organized against Christianity. So they had these inquisitions, which were trying to find, what are the background of people, what their real allegiance are. I don't think they came to any good results, but they certainly were aware of the problem. Now, I would suggest, you ask, who are the secret society members? I mean, the oligarchs are easy enough to identify, but they're hard to really know exactly who they are and what they are, because they have these identities which hide, I think, their reality. The way to find out would just be do DNA testing. I mean, if you look at the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, well, who are they? I mean, there are people who claim the Rothschilds aren't even Jewish historically. I mean, I don't know how much evidence they have, but there are people who make the case. They just say they use Jewishness as a way to protect their real identity, which has to do with Venetian dark family secrets and things. There's all kinds of conspiracy theories about this. But how do you know? Well, you really, what you need to know, and what we need to know about our political class urgently, is who they are. Who are they really? Who are they related to? What is their real ethnicity? When you look at all of the malevolence that the population is suffering because our political class is a secret society, you can see it's just absolutely urgent to get to the bottom of this. Because, I mean, if you look at the collapse of Building 7, I mean, just going back to 2001 and 911, it's completely obvious that it's controlled demolition. I mean, it's just ridiculous to argue otherwise. There's just, you can see there's dozens of videotapes of the thing. It collapses symmetrically and at free fall speed, and they claim that fire was the cause of this because it wasn't struck by a plane. Well, what I say is that, look, if you want to make this as even a reasonable position that it's not controlled demolition, you have to show at least one example of a building that was not controlled demolition that collapses symmetrically. or you have to show one example of one that a building, a steel frame building that falls at free fall speed that was not controlled demolition. If you don't have any examples, if there's no examples in history of either one of them, then the fact that both of these unique phenomena occurred at one time and they are aspects of controlled demolition, then you really can't bring this as a reasonable position to the public. But here's my point, is that, well, then why aren't the political class trying to get to the bottom of it? You know, why do they maintain this ludicrous position that it just came down in some kind of weird, complicated manner that no one can really explain or understand? Why can't they just admit the truth? Well, the point I'm making is that the whole political class is a Judeo-Masonic I call it a cesspool, because that's really because of the lying. I mean, these are intelligent and albeit amoral people, but they are a cesspool because they have to lie. There's just all this lying that goes on just chronically, to the public. Well, this is, has always been a burden. I mean, you look at World War I and World War II and the Masonic control over those events. Europeans have been systematically genocided, right? Systematically genocided by these activities, which the political class brings about, and the public suffers from because we have no understanding or control over what we refer to as the political class. I mean, World War I, it was a complete Masonic project on the British side, for example. All the generals were Freemasons, but on the German side, I mean, the Kaiser was the cousin of the King of England. They're both Masons. They're both grandchildren of Queen Victoria, who is the Queen Bee Freemason. So you have that situation, and then a war that has no coherent explanation as to why it would start. And the next thing you know, you have 60 million people dead. Well, there's something wrong here. And the political class has failed, and yet we don't really get to analyze the political class closely or replace them. So the same situation is happening today. I mean, if you look at just present news stories right now, this day, you see the Ukrainian situation, which is, and I would say, is completely incoherent. There's no belief that's possible that Ukraine can withstand Russian attacks. They're going to lose. Why is the Zelensky and NATO not suing for peace? Well, I would say it's the same reason. To me, I would say the best explanation is that it is the same explanation as to why World War I broke out, and then why it lasted for so long and led to nothing except for a big pile of European bodies. What you're looking at in Ukraine is just depopulation of Europeans. That's really what Zelensky and NATO have in mind here. Now, what you'd want to do is get DNA testing of every single person involved in the decision-making. All of the EU ministers who are in favor of the war. You'd want to see, the U.S., like Biden, people like this, like, who are they? Why would they permit such a useless slaughter? And now I would say the casualties are up over 1 million on the Ukrainian side. So why would they permit this when they know perfectly well that in a few years it's all going to end up basically as this area under the control of Russia, no matter what they do? NATO has shot its bolt. They don't have anything really more to add in terms of weaponry. The militaries of Europe, the ones that NATO would draw from, have all been demasculinized. I mean, there's hardly anything there left in terms of actual fighting units. So the whole situation is just completely ridiculous. Why is this being permitted to go on? And I think that the answer would be to understand the political class that's creating it. And then on the other side of the Mediterranean, you have Gaza, which is just, again, I have like a lot of relations with people in Israel. Caesar's Messiah was popular there, and so I have like podcasts that I do, and I know people, and they're very upset about what they see is an inexplicable explanation for October the 7th. They have no belief that the story the government's telling them about that is real. And if you look at it, it's sort of like Building 7, and you have just a lie followed by a stonewall where they don't permit any analysis of the lie. On October the 7th, you had automated border technology, and the Israeli border technology is basically so good it is a product sold worldwide, right? The Elbit border technology, which is primarily automated. Now, I don't know exactly what techniques they were using, but I know in 2017, Elbit, the company, it's an Israeli company that creates the border technology, gave a little summation of what they were doing, and their claims was that it was automated. Okay, you had things like landmines, automatic machine guns, and these things are literally controlled by AI. Every square inch of the border is observed 24/7. And the explanation that, the Israelis got complacent is not coherent. I mean, how complacent can a landmine get?
Right.
I mean, how complacent can automatic weapons that are controlled by, sensors that humans are not interacting with, how complacent can that be? And remember, this occurred, there was 15 different intrusions purportedly by Hamas, 15. So you had this automated technology fail 15 times, 0 for 15. Then you have whistleblowers from the IDF who came forward, who had worked on the border, and they said, this is impossible. Because it isn't just the automated technology, there's layers of redundancy. There are humans that actually are observing all of the area of the border. Every 40 yards, one of them said, there was human eyes on this section, and they're trained to not even look sideways. They're trained to just keep their eyes on the little area that they're in control of. The one woman said, you couldn't get a pigeon across the border without us knowing it. So now the intrusion occurs without evidently any of the automatic systems preventing it, going off, landmines, automatic, machine guns and things. They somehow come across. But here's where it just gets ridiculous, because since the humans then would know and see that, you've had intrusions by terrorists into Israel, the IDF would respond with its, mechanized machine gun helicopters immediately. They would have wiped out this rabble within 3 or 4 minutes. They could never have gotten quarter mile into Israel. They would have been seen helicopters with, they have so many munitions on these things. They can blow up 100 square meters in a second, But they didn't do anything. In fact, the first response that you can identify is 7 hours later, right, where the IDF shows up and you start having, the situation starts to get under Israeli control. Well, that's impossible. It's just impossible. You just can't do that length of time without military response along the Hamas border. The failure of the automatic weapons is ridiculous. All of this is really preposterous. It's just completely inexplicable. So it's so inexplicable that the agency in Israel that protested, and this is very important, it was the comptroller. It was the person who is writing the checks. And he was furious because he said, look, we paid for all this technology. It failed completely. It was 0 for 15. It's supposed to be 99.99999, and it was 0 for 15. I want to see where our money went. The comptroller brought an inquisition, an investigation into what happened. And Sunday, the High Court shut it down, saying, because they said, we've received information on a secured basis, in other words, top secret, public can't see it, from the military, saying that this would damage the military activity in Gaza of the IDF. Well, I would say, yeah, that's probably a very true statement, because if the investigation continued, and it would just become completely obvious that there was a stand down, that this was done with the idea of creating enough of a news story and enough, purported violence against Israelis that they would have a pretext for genocide. This whole thing is an obvious stand down to create a pretext so that they can go to the world opinion market and say, look, we're not genocidal racists. We are just fighting back here. We are defending ourselves, and Hamas is, see how bad they are. But I mean, no, I don't think any clear-minded, serious person can take that as an honest explanation of it.
Well, what do you think the intended outcome of all this is for the ruling class, at least those that are on the side of this global enslavement and always have been? You mentioned World War I, World War II. There's these stepping stones throughout our modern history that led to where we're at now. I believe JFK assassination, 9/11, COVID, and all the little opportunities in between, January 6th and October 7th, these special dates where these high-impact events occur that open doors for the next event to occur. What do you think is the end goal for all of this?
I think they want the planet to themselves. And so I think you're looking at just a very slow motion genocide of humanity. You mentioned the COVID situation. There's now a lot of reports indicating that the birth rates have been affected by the vaccine, that sperm motility is off, that there's something in the vaccine that it apparently has a sterilizing aspect. This is science that's a little over my head. I mean, I do study it, but I think certainly, given the fact that COVID was not particularly dangerous, the idea of like forcing this kind of genetic operation, artificial, genetic operation, putting RNA into every single cell in the human body and having it perform an artificial function, there has to be some explanation. Again, it's inexplicable. You see, it's inexplicable except for the idea that, well, it's just a gigantic sterilization project, right? That makes sense. So everything, you mentioned all of those different aspects of the process we've been tortured with over the last 1,000 years. All of them make sense in terms of the thesis that this is basically trying to get the planet to themselves. This group, and I call it Judeo-Masonic, but it certainly seems as though the oligarchs of many different ethnicities have been brought into the fold, right? I mean, obviously the Chinese and so you can't, without more information, without some DNA testing, you can't really be sure what it looks like or what it actually reflects. But I would say the best way to understand this is to read Deuteronomy or the book of Isaiah. You get images of a post-Gentile world, and the people who are creating that literature are using Gentile in a very broad sense. It just means non-Jew. They're not just talking about Europeans. I mean, in Deuteronomy, they have, ethnicities, 7 ethnicities, 7 being a special number. And all of these ethnicities are, the Israelis are given permission to genocide. Netanyahu, and this is really telling, this is a good way of understanding, of answering your question. I think this is the kind of the best way, is that Netanyahu referred to the Palestinians last month as Amalek. Now, Amalek was a tribe, an ethnicity, that in Deuteronomy, God gives the Israelis a permission to exterminate, to genocide down to the last child. That's an important expression, down to the last child. So Netanyahu referred to the Palestinians as Amalek. Didn't get a lot of play in Western media, but the Israelis, a lot of them, people that I know, their eyebrows arched because they said their point was, And some of these people, incidentally, are very righteous, moral people. And a couple of them said, look, there's something wrong here, because Netanyahu is in fact killing children right now. And to use the biblical expression of a God-given right to kill children, this seems, kind of a psychopathic, position. But in fact, it's just a fundamentalist position of a certain sect of Jews, the way they interpret the Old Testament. The Old Testament, if you interpret it literally like that, you are able to just create a world that you only have this particular group of Jews in habitation. And I'm sad to say, but that's a pretty kind of rational way of looking at what we've been experiencing. This group were very likely the tectons, who are actually described in both the New Testament and in the histories of Josephus as not regular Jews. They're some kind of, well, they're Freemasons. In Greek, the word tecton means Freemason. It's actually the way you would describe Freemasonry, tectons. Well, so this special group are distinct from regular Jews. Josephus described them as being separate, and in the New Testament, Jesus is questioned as to whether or not he is a tecton, and they say his father was a tecton. Joseph was, his father was called a carpenter, but that's a complete misinterpretation. The word is actually Mason. So they're wondering if, and remember, he dies at 33. You have this kind of, the symbolism is. So what I think you have is a secret society that was well organized in the first century that basically went underground. I mean, you have the Knights Templar would be the first kind of manifestation of them. But then that is opposed by Christianity. De Molay is burned on the steps of Notre Dame on like Friday the 13th, I think it was. Then later on, Notre Dame itself is burned on Friday the 13th. So you have the kind of tit for tat, sort of kind of connection between the events. But the Templars become the Freemasons, and then the next thing you know, Masons start appearing in the political class. George Washington is a Freemason. So many of the presidents have been. And the ones who aren't, or who weren't identified, I mean, how do you know? I mean, certainly over half of them were, but many of them, you just have no idea what they are. You have like Clinton. Well, he's not known as a Freemason, but he certainly was a De Molay. He went to De Molay school and he was the premier De Molay student, in the United States. He had certificates and awards and things. So very special individual, claims to be a Christian, but he had this asterisk connection into a secret society, like the Bush family. You see Reagan and Nixon at the Bohemian Grove, and you wonder, well, why? Why would they be part of a secret society if they're really sort of, these democratic, individuals, that are of people? Why do they need to be in these secret societies? Well, it makes no sense except under the explanation I give that they are what I call lifetime actors. They give a personality to the public for political gain, which is to say to gain political power, but that isn't their real self. This is just what they tell us. And then the narratives, the histories that these people concoct are not the real histories. They're contorted so that we are believing what they want for purposes of control. I mean, like COVID, it was supposed to kill 10% of the victims, when it first came out. Well, that was off by, 50,000 to 1 is what it ends up being. Well, how could they have made these huge mistakes? Well, social control comes out of all of the inexplicable errors that they make, like in Ukraine, and in Gaza, World War I, World War II. We're just constantly suffering from the lies, that the political class gives us so they can, ratchet up the social control ratchet down our population, and they're just in general heading toward this world I described where they're the only ones in existence.
Now, many look at the control system and have the understanding that it's based off of ancient occulted spiritual beliefs and ritualistic practices, but there's some that argue in our modern age that at the highest levels they hide behind these spiritual beliefs. There's no spiritual basis behind it at all. It's just so that they can gain power and control.
They are cynical, empirical, and have no spiritual belief whatsoever. They use spirituality as a bamboozlement to hide behind. In other words, it's a way. A good example would be, I wrote an article which the public, anyone can look at. It's for free. It's online, called "The Freemason Invention of the Nazi Party." And I show that the Nazi Party comes from the Theosophical Society, which is just it's a hodgepodge and a mumbo jumbo of spirituality. Helen Blavatsky kind of created it as an annex of Freemasonry, right? And it's promoted and funded by Freemasons, but it's a completely incoherent kind of spiritual system. I mean, it's just that, frankly, it's ludicrous. But it becomes, over time, I mean, this is actually, you're talking about 70 years, so you can see how incremental and patient they are. It becomes the kind of German race paganism that was the basis, the kind of philosophical basis for the Nazi Party, right? So in other words, you had a transition from Christianity to this German paganism, right? Which basically then ends up as the Nazi Party. Now, the spirituality that's being presented is completely cynical. They are just using it. It's absolutely clear when you look at it over time and all the different individuals. None of these people believe any of this nonsense. They're just creating a little bit of kind of intellectual space so that when they go to actually onset the Nazi Party, it has what seems to be a coherent explanation for itself. In other words, that you have this German paganism, which has been presented over time by Masonic individuals, inserted into the German culture. So it just seems like there is an explanation for Hitler's behavior that is grounded in a spiritual sense, right? But the fact is, it's just absolutely cynical. I would say Freemasonry is, again, it's just completely cynical. And even though you don't really know because of the levels, but I wrote an article called "The Freemason in the Rye," which is a deconstruction of Catcher in the Rye by Salinger. And I show that the Freemason, or the Catcher in the Rye, is just a occulted homage to Freemasonry, in which the different levels of Freemasonry are represented. So Holden Caulfield is actually going through the steps to become a master Mason, right? That's what the Catcher in the Rye is actually about. And notice even the title, The Catcher in the Rye, what is the Catcher in the Rye? It is the individual in a wheat field with a scythe cutting wheat down. So it's the symbol of the apocalypse is being represented right in the title, albeit a little occulted. But the Catcher in the Rye is the individual who, the apocalypse uses as its representation. He has the scythe and he's cutting through things. Well, in the story, Holden Caulfield finally becomes a master Mason. Two brothers bring him to where the ancient Egyptian symbols are. He gets to go in by himself into what is being symbolically depicted as the Holy of Holies, which is something in Freemason lodges that they use for when they are bringing people up to the high levels. And what he sees on the wall isn't some spirituality. It isn't some, deeper understanding of human nature. It's FU. This is what he comes in and he sees the wall, and there written on the wall is "F-U," right? Well, what that is showing is it's a way of showing that this high level is not spirituality. It's F-U. They're saying, to hell with you. We have the bamboozlement, we have the pseudo spirituality, but at the end of it, there's F-U, there's genocide. So this is really what is the secret spiritual kind of understanding that the oligarch class has, is that this all leads to the genocide of humanity. They are moving toward a world in which they are the only individuals, that they would be, have the planet to themselves. Whoever they are and whatever they are definitely trying to depopulate. They have all of the global weather change things, that they're trying to get people to accept that, well, we have to depopulate. There's just too many of us. They don't talk about the destructive kind of chemical insertions into the world that are artificial. They just talk about it's a number of people. This is the problem, right? So we've got to depopulate. Don't complain about not having children. Don't complain about having high levels of people dying, in their 40s. This is all good. This is great for the planet. So we're just being, what has happened is fairly obvious, in my opinion, is you've had a secret society that I call the Judeo-Masonic group has taken over the political class of the world. They have, through the centuries, slithered in. They've replaced kind of political and monistic leaders, that were from the actual ethnicity that they represented, and they've replaced them with these lifetime actors. So I would maintain, if you did genetic testing of like the last 5 US presidents, including Obama, you'd find that their ethnicity and their families are related. And that is the group that is moving toward worldwide genocide. And when you get to that perspective, then the world makes a lot more sense. Then you understand the kind of weird misuse of science to produce this climate change horror that they've got, giving us. You certainly understand things like Gaza and the Ukrainian war. Then you can even understand, 9/11. It all will make sense from that perspective. So hopefully, there are enough sort of clear-minded, independent researchers like yourself. Last time I was on, I praised you and I said, hey, you really deserve support. I want to reiterate that. People should support you, because you have to have the courage and clear-mindedness to do what you do, and there's just not enough of them. It is growing, though. And I think I mentioned last time that we're basically winning. It may seem impossible because we are not gaining any political traction, right? We're not really organizing politically yet. But the first step is the information revolution. And there we're clearly winning, because you see the complete collapse of participation in the old media, right? I mean, the CNN. I mean, I do podcasts that have larger subscription than stuff like on
yeah.
I mean, seriously. So, well, how is that possible? So there is this, kind of transition. And the other thing is, if someone comes to the level of understanding where they could have a discussion with you, where they would understand what you're saying. I mean, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, and if someone can understand what you're saying, that individual would never go back to where they would take CNN or Fox News seriously. It just doesn't happen, because the human mind doesn't operate that way. So everyone who converts intellectually to the point where they can understand you and can agree with your logic, with your reason, it makes sense, your understanding of the world is more coherent, they don't go back. Because the point is, propaganda can only work against the human mind if that individual who is the victim gives the person giving out the propaganda trust. You have to be in a state of trust where you really think that Wolf Blitzer, or Sean Hannity are actually there representing some honest attempt at giving real stuff, right? You have to give them trust. But if you don't have that, if you don't have the trust to the oligarchs' media outlets, then it doesn't work. The propaganda doesn't work, because all it takes is that much skepticism where you go, I hear what you're saying. I'm just going to think about it and maybe look into some facts on my own before I actually accept your position on 9/11 or on October 7th or any of the bamboozling elements, that they give. So if they get to the point where they can understand you, then they are lost forever, really. Because all you need is that much skepticism and to not give them trust, where the propaganda just becomes ridiculous. So this is something they're well aware of, obviously. And when people get to certain levels, I think of popularity, they try to batter them down. And then, of course, they've developed expressions which are intended to end thought. They're trying to keep people from moving to understanding you, for example. So they've developed, anti-Semitic, Holocaust denier, truther, white supremacist. It's one of my favorites.
Anti-Semitic.
It's like that. I tell you, I've never met a white supremacist. Have you ever actually I'm a white supremacist. I have a group that we meet, and I've never even met one. I don't know anyone, and yet they use this expression. Like the FBI said that white supremacists are the greatest threat to America. Had to roll on the ground with laughter. Really? Honest to God, if I knew one, maybe I could see, okay, this is maybe it's a far-fetched, but at least it's not insane. No, it's insane. There just aren't any white supremacists. And now, you have this revolution in the EU where they're trying to restrict politicians or get rid of politicians who have this open border policy, because they can say that the immigration from North Africa and the Mideast that's going on is not good for their cultures, right? Everyone can see it now. There's more violence. There's the economics are bad. It's just really been, and of course it's the end of long-standing European cultures like the Danish, the Swedes. They're just getting rid of them with this immigration policy. So they now have, in the last election, they posed, the politicians who have this as their policy. And what are they called? They're saying this is a far right. They use the expression far right. They use that expression rather than, well, these are the traditionalists. These are the people who are promoting the traditional European culture, but instead they have become far right because the way they're, I'm just giving this as an example of how they're using language for the purpose of shutting down thinking. So far right, conspiracy theorist, truther, anti-Semitic, Holocaust denier, they're all just designed, these expressions, to have intimidation in back of them, that people know that if they're charged with those things, that first of all, they can't defend themselves, right? The charge is the conviction. They're given this negative stance, they're put in the public eyes and they're negative, but this isn't that they have any kind of clear-minded rationale that people should be aware of. They're just they're bad in the heart and in the mind, so stop thinking about them. But the fact is that if you look at, for example, the Holocaust statistics, every year fewer and fewer people believe the narrative. Every year. Why? It's because even though there's not a lot of information out there, there's enough that it's kind of swirling around. People are going, wait a second, where are the gas chambers? Where are the crematorium? Where are the bodies? How did this? What happened here? There's no evidence. So it's all moving toward ending the trust that we have been giving the oligarch class for 1,000 years. And what is your role and your achievement is just to keep that process moving forward. Because when the information revolution hits, it doesn't have to hit 50%. I would say if it gets to 15% of the public, could have a conversation with you where you could, you'd have your expressions and your reasoning would be comprehensible, and they would say, you're making a lot of sense. You could have that Socratic engagement. I think it's over. I just don't think the political structure that they have set up can actually function if you have even 15% of the public going, I don't buy it. I don't buy you at all. I just think you're lying. Because remember, it's the word that they have, like their words, Holocaust denier, white supremacist. Well, our expression is liar. You're just lying. This is a lie given for the purpose of propaganda. And so, we're moving them toward we're moving the public toward where they can go, I think you're lying. I want you to justify what you're claiming.
This is why I'm encouraged with what I'm seeing with different communities and groups of people that are becoming more aware and questioning the narrative more.
Sure.
Now, I want to go back to the psychological warfare aspect and what we were talking about, the non-spiritual basis behind all of these agendas. There seems to be this mind control aspect to where if they add in biblical prophecy and this occult symbolism to try and get people to believe that there is this higher power or this demonic force that they are working with that is behind their agendas, it causes more fear, it causes more hesitation for the public to be working against some of these quote-unquote dark forces. But from what you're saying, it's just all a big psychological operation to pump that fear in.
Yeah. There's a picture, it's online, of Maria Abramovich and the current Zion of the Rothschild family. I forget his first name, but they're sitting there, and in back of them, there's a famous picture of Satan, and it's called "Satan Gathers His Legions," I believe is the name of the painting. Satan is nude, of course. Both of those individuals, well, certainly Abramovich, engage in kind of hocus pocus spirituality, right? That you can see as satanic. She is the one who was talking about spirit cooking, which is related, of course, to Crowley, the cake of light. He talked about these kinds of rituals. She claims, well, it's sort of like Crowley, but I'm not really trying to be a Satanist. I'm just, copying him, but of course this is ridiculous. And in fact, in the email exchanges that talked about Hillary Clinton's, associates, going to spirit cooking events, one of them actually talks about thelema, this just lifts the veil completely. Now you can see that, yeah, of course, these people are operating in the context of Crowley. It's Aleister Crowley, because he developed the thelema religion. And the expression in the email was, I want you to do me a thelema favor. Well, you wouldn't be able to use the term in that way, asking for a favor, if you weren't really familiar with the Crowleyan hocus pocus spirituality. And of course, you could never use the expression in that way if you didn't have the confidence that the person you were giving the question to also had the same understanding of thelema, right? And these are associates of Hillary Clinton who are having this exchange. Well, okay, so they're satanic, right? I mean, this is pretty straightforward. They're satanic. Well, do they believe in Satan as like a fallen god with powers that they can tap? Well, of course not. It's ridiculous. These are the most empirical. They're very scientific in their, kind of application of force, right? But they know what they're really doing is they're trying to just use spirituality as a way to confuse people. And the example I gave about the Nazi Party coming from this Freemason insertion of spiritual paganism that is, they claimed was ancient, the Aryan people, right? Well, Aryan wasn't a self-identifier for the German people until they brought it to them in the 19th century. That It was just done to create enough hocus pocus that eventually you would give trust to someone who would want you to do something that was self-destructive. So when they use like 911, and I gave you the explanation of the date, right? They're mimicking the people who created Christianity. You see, what you really have here is a kind of eye for an eye. Christianity, if you read my book, Caesar's Messiah, you can see that the Roman oligarchs developed it as a way to control the Messianic Jews that were rebelling. So they developed Christianity primarily for vanity. That's a whole long piece of analysis, but I won't go into now. But they also wanted to control the Jews. And so they wanted to switch the kind of messianism that was rebelling against Rome, that was producing messiahs that were rebel leaders, which of course is very logical because remember, they're claiming to be from the lineage of David. Well, David wasn't a turn the other cheek, give to Caesar what is Caesar, blessed are the peacemakers guy, right? He was a warrior, xenophobic fundamentalist who cut the head off of Goliath, right? But he had the power of God. So he's again, you're dealing with kind of spiritual craziness, but this would have been the messiahs in the first century. So when you create Jesus, who is pro-Roman and pacifistic, you're just in a mind control operation. Well, one of the things that they did was create this artificial relationship between the death of Jesus and the end of the war. They're trying to show that the new covenant, the New Testament, I mean, the book is called the New Testament, but that's a mistranslation. It actually, the better translation is covenant. The new covenant, the one that Jesus Christ is giving to us. This covenant has a 40-year cycle from the end of the Passover lamb to the kind of ownership of the promised land. And this is a mirror of the first covenant. I mean, think about the first covenant. You have the slaughter of the Passover lamb, and then 40 years later, they wander in the wilderness for 40 years, but then the Jews can go into the promised land and become basically the Israelites because now they have Israel. It's 40-year cycle. So you have the death of the Passover lamb and 33, and the death of the Passover lamb, and then you have 40 years later after the wandering, the ownership of the promised land. Well, when they created the new covenant, this goes to your point, and is an example of kind of what you're asking for, is that when they create the new covenant, they want to bamboozle the people, right? So what they did is they said that Jesus Christ died on Passover 33, and that's 40 years to the day from the fall of Masada, 40 years to the day. So they mirror the 40-year cycle, right? They have a mirror. So it's now they're giving the people who they're trying to seduce into the new covenant, they're giving them this psychological, spiritual kind of mind control event where, look, we know that God's hand is given to the new covenant because we have the same cycle, just like the first covenant, the covenant that we're replacing, the old covenant being replaced with the new covenant. So we have this 40-year cycle from the destruction of the temple to, from the execution of the Passover lamb to the ownership of Israel by the Romans. The new covenant is now installed, and the promised land is now given to the Romans, who take complete ownership of it at that point. Okay, so it's hocus pocus. Well, then you look at 911, and it's occurring at, on the date that the temple is destroyed. The Solomon building is collapses symmetrically, Well, you can actually take the position that if these things were real, that they are metaphysically, kind of connected into the divine, because the events are not. They have to be spiritually connected, just like the Romans claim that the temple fell on the same day, or was raised on the same day as the first temple was destroyed, right? So Rome said, look, it was 911. That's when the temple was raised, same date, showing this divine connection. Well, they're using that, they're extending off of that bamboozlement with their own bamboozlement, right? They're saying, and guess what? The New World Order is being onset on 911, you see, and it's your Solomon building that was destroyed, not ours, basically, you know. So they use these, well, in this case, it's foreshadowing, but they use the kind of religious symbolism as a veneer for their activity, but you'd be naive to believe that you're actually looking at anything real. They're not there. These dates are being done for the purpose of revenge and humiliation, and the events, the way that they're manifesting it through very precise real world behavior. Right? They brought down the towers with controlled demolition. It wasn't God or spiritual activity, right? So whenever you see, like, you know, the kind, particularly when you look at Crowley, when you look at this sort of satanic activity, and people say, well, look, this is Crowley. These people they're Satanists. This is a misunderstanding. They have to look deeper into Crowley. He's a British agent. He's a member of the British secret police. He is directly connected to the same lodge that produces Blavatsky. The same person, John Yacker, who gave Blavatsky her funding and her Masonic passport so she could go around and set up the Theosophical Society, is the one who did the same thing with Crowley. Crowley's kind of bizarre Satanism, you have to stand back from it for a second and then think, well, why are they doing this? It's because the target is Christian culture, right? So Crowley, it is not the connection to the devil that Crowley is really manifesting. It's liberated sexuality, right? And an end in the belief of the sort of logos of Christianity that holds together, you know, European culture. Crowley is just an attack upon Christian culture to, you know, produce free love, Satanism, all of which then ends up with sex, drugs, and rock and roll being given, you know, to the boomers in the 60s in a project that obviously comes out or is very often connected into the CIA, right? So it's all just one system of bamboozlement and mind control and propaganda. And sexuality then is being, you know, unleashed so that the family cannot exist, because what's really being destroyed here is the family, ethnicity, and the power that those organizations represent. What they're doing is creating isolated individuals, right? Your ethnicity doesn't exist anymore. Family's not real. And you're given this workers' paradise of unlimited sexual activity, but you're politically completely impotent. If you look at like TikTok and the kind of sexuality that's being represented there, of just, there's no hookup. I mean, there's no family that you can create out of these people, right? They are into hookup sex. And from that position, no families will be produced. There won't even be I don't think, another generation, right? Because none of them very few of them can have children. How could they have children, you know, from that position of the pornographic world, the hookup sex, you know, so family production to be going down there. It's all headed toward genocide. You just have to, I mean, as I've maintained, it's, you just look at the goal here is depopulation. And there's different ways. And one of the tricks that they're using is this satanic spirituality that they're pretending to believe in. They're trying to seduce people into its manifestations of, you know, get into sex and drugs. But it's all just headed toward one simple place, and that's just depopulation.
Now, earlier you were saying that you have the feeling that as a whole, we are headed in the right direction. There's a lot of failure on the part of the ruling class. I see the same thing. But I also see that the evidence of the control system crumbling is being put out there more. example, some of the celebrities that are being outed for their degeneracy and illegal activities, and people in power above and beyond that. Do you think that this is a reaction to the failures of this New World Order system?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Answer is I don't really know. I think there'd be, in different cases, would have different explanations. You'd have to almost go by its kind of phenomena by phenomena, celebrity by celebrity. I think some are legitimate, and I think others are not. I think the independent media. I mean, I don't think Alex Jones is a legitimate individual.
I agree.
He had the foreshadowing of 911, very specific. I mean, that's ridiculous. You don't. So what they do is they create. They try to lead the opposition. They try to take control of the opposition by their old technique of gaining the political control over it. So they try to get the most visible leaders of the independent media as people that they have control over. So this is what you end up with is cul-de-sacs. These individuals are created to push you into cul-de-sacs, which are basically places where you just you come to it's like in with the COVID mandates. They will take you to a place where they go, well, what we're dealing with is the military industrial complex playing 4D chess, and you'll never really get to know what's going on. It's a cul-de-sac. No, actually, you need to think a little bit further here and try to come up with the actual individuals who are producing this, right? And you can, if you keep going, keep thinking. Don't stop just because you have military industrial complex as a concept. That doesn't give you any explanation at all. That's just another question that you have to just keep, trying to answer. So as far as, like, are we winning? Well, or as there is the, kind of their system of control crumbling. Well, I don't think that's true at all. I think they're actually, it's becoming stronger because they're developing technology. You're getting this nudge technology in Facebook and Google and things. But what's happening is an information revolution. I mean, this is the thing, is that we are not in a political mode yet. We're not in a mode whereby we would start to see, activity that could crumble, their structure of power. But what's happening is the truth is just getting out. And then at a certain point, you'll start to see political activity when you get the percentages of people who are, as I've said, could have conversations with you. When you get to that point, say about 15%, then you'll start to see that the old political system won't really work very well. It's almost there. I mean, 50% of Americans are registered as independents now. I mean, this has never happened before. And this is a direct result of, the kind of power of the independent media, right? That has been the force that has brought all the cynicism. Hasn't been the mainstream media. New York Times isn't doing any of this. CNN or Fox News isn't doing any of this. It's people like you that are doing this. And so the information revolution is moving along very well. More and more people are losing their trust. So the propaganda cannot work on them. And therefore, they'll start looking at phenomena like October 7th and the invasion of Israel by Hamas, or the explanation that's being given for the Ukrainian war. And they'll go, this is it's not realistic. It's just, this is absurd. So the ruling class will become more and more exposed as malevolent. And then when you get up to, say, 15%, you'll start to see zealots demanding changes in the political system, changes in the way that, political people are selected, to run for office. Their system won't work anymore. Now, at that point, then the world will become very dangerous because they're not going to just go away. But I think that the power of the human mind is such that once the process starts, I just don't see how they can turn it off. And I think when they attack you or me or any other, they're almost at diminishing returns. Where when they attack people or try to, when they use their expressions like Holocaust denier or truther or white supremacist, it's so incoherent and, well, just obviously false, that they are actually making more people skeptical then you see, then they're pushing back into the darkness. I don't think their techniques to push people back into the darkness work at all. I think they're just ridiculous, and I think people can see right through them. And I think I'm not aware of anybody who's come out into the sunlight and go, gee, I can listen to you and I can understand you, and then go, I realize I was wrong.
Yeah.
I realize that Wolf Blitzer and Sean Hannity are actually, it just doesn't happen, brother. So the thing, that's what I'm saying when I say we're winning. People kind of misunderstand my meaning. It's just that their techniques to push us back into the darkness are literally ridiculous. They are not working at all. So you get people walk out into the sunlight, they don't go back. So we'll just see, because more and more people are getting kind of skeptical about the whole narrative of what they're trying to sell us.
Revolution's got to start somewhere. Joe, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Essential information. Before we close out, remind everyone where they can find out more about you, get your books, and everything else.
If they want to buy the books, just go to CaesarsMessiah.com. If I have a whole bunch of articles on the Beatles, on Freemasonry, the Ketron-Narai analysis, the article on the Tempest, they're all at postflaviana.org. I mean, that's kind of hard to understand, but it's the Flavians are my understanding of who created Christianity. So postflaviana.org or .com, and you'll see all the articles. They're free, and just check them out. And if you have questions, email me at joeatwill@gmail.com. I try to get to all the emails. That takes me a while, but I try to get through them. So, and support, for Forbidden Knowledge News. I mean, this is really where this is the future, brother. It's you. So good luck.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for coming on.
Yeah.
I can't wait to do this again. There's much more. Much more information.
Hope to. Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll see you again. We'll talk again tomorrow, everyone. All right. That was a great episode. Love his information. Although I don't agree with everything, one of the biggest things I do not agree with, that at its foundation, it is not a spiritual war. I do believe that this is all about the unseen forces that we deal with on a daily basis, and always have since the beginning of time. But again, he does have great information. It is a great way to understand the material aspects of this war that we are facing against humanity. So thank you again, Mr. Atwill. I just had to add this little closing tidbit of my thoughts on the episode. Great episode. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk again next time.